Okay, so good evening, everyone. We'll start, and we may have some folks coming and going as your own schedule permits. You're welcome to be here for the full time. If you have to hop off, just so you know, this is being recorded, and will be available for you to watch anytime afterward. I'll start maybe by letting you know who I am and why we're all here. My name is Brian, and I'm with Engage Winona. And we have this series of community workshops that launched last week and is running through April for a couple of reasons. One is that Engage Winona is really committed to just spreading and sharing community knowledge about how to create change. And that change takes a variety of forms, everything from volunteer projects to things like, how do I start my own small business, or am I interested in a nonprofit, which is what we'll cover today. And that this is also being recorded tonight kind of for a connected purpose, is that we have this awesome program called Lived Experience Leaders. And this is a group of diverse participants that have been going through a pretty immersive cohort experience dating back to last September, both working on just celebrating their lived experience and owning it and sharing it, and how that journey has taken them to where they are today. And then using their lived experience to create these really powerful visions of community change. And so we may have a couple of those folks here tonight. And either way, we're also recording this to share this as content for that group. So really dual purposes. A couple other things I'll share before we get started, but I did want to mention in the meantime, as you're all here and getting settled, one thing we would really appreciate for you to use the chat and just to tell us one reason you're here tonight, one question you're hoping to get answered, or one piece that you're hoping to learn. And even if that answer is, I have no idea, I thought I'd come in and check it out, that's great too. So here, I'm going to also post that in our chat too. And then just like, as I mentioned, some quick Zoom etiquette, videos on or off. We certainly love to see it, but we also know this is dinner time. So if you're eating and you feel more comfortable just doing that off screen, that's great. You can come and go with your video as you choose. This will be pretty informal and loose, but I think as we're presenting at first, if folks can stay muted and then just jump on in and with questions too, that's great. What we'll do is we'll have Jovy talk about her small business. We'll have Christy from the chamber talk about small businesses. And then Crystal with the Advocacy Center in Heggie Haven is not feeling well, wasn't able to be with us tonight. Wanted to pass on her regards. And so I will fill in and talk a bit about the nonprofit journey. And then we'll just open up the space for conversation. We can do one-on-ones with folks. We can just answer a couple of questions, whatever makes sense to you. But we're really looking forward to sharing some stories tonight, talking about some individual journeys of what it takes to get to opening a small business or starting a nonprofit. And then just really hoping to demystify that process. That's really the vision, is that if this is something you've been considering and just don't know what the pathway looks like and wants to learn more, that's a great opportunity. If you're already, like as Carrie has shared, starting to put in some work on it and want to talk about your next steps or just hear from us, that's great too. So really wherever you're at. So I think with that, I think I've covered my spiel, other than I am also doubling as your tech support guide for tonight. So if you have issues, you can share it in the chat. You can reach out privately if you need any assistance too. And I'm also sort of monitoring our social media. Folks are stuck getting in. So I may be coming on and off screen. But I think with that, I just wanted to introduce our presenters tonight, Jovy Rockey and Christy Ransom. They will do a wonderful job introducing themselves, and they're just wonderful, accomplished women. I would not do justice by trying to read a litany of resumes for them, and I know they'll be sharing their story with you. So what we will do is we'll start with Jovy, and she'll talk through her journey for 15 minutes or so. Christy will talk through her journey, I think both personally and somewhat from the chamber perspective. I'll talk a bit about sort of my journey with Engage Winona and what that's looked like from a nonprofit perspective. And we'll just sort of follow the thread. If there are questions that come up at the end of a presentation, we could explore them. If you wanted to save them at the end, that's fine too. It's really informal. And then either way, after all three of us share, we'll just engage in some conversation and some questions. And that's really, we'd love to hear questions from you. And if that's comfortable for you sharing them, speaking them out loud, great. You can put them in the chat, whatever works. So I think with that, I will turn it over to Jovy to get us started and share your story.
Thanks, Brian. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Jovy Rockey. I am a small business owner. I am a jewelry artist by trade. I also owned a and gallery in downtown Winona. And yeah, my whole journey started actually 9 years ago now. I just realized today that it was 9 years ago last month. So it doesn't feel like it's been that long, but it has. So
Jovy, on my end, I think I'm losing you. I think others are.
Arts things on the side.
So we're watching you. Yeah, we lost you for a second there, Jovy, and you're coming on back. I heard fun arts things on the side.
I should move closer to my router. I don't know if that will help. Otherwise, worst case scenario, I could turn off my video and then we'll just see what happens. So you guys get to travel through from my office to the front here.
We get the tour of the small business. And
yeah,
we appreciate everybody being here. I mean, we're deep into a pandemic. It's a nice evening in March. You know, we're already kind of in one of the not so great scenarios anyway. So tech issues are not kind of the core of the problem. So we saw the tour, Jovy, so the connection must be good now.
Yeah. Okay. So you can hear me now. I'm not cutting out. Okay. Sorry. Let me get myself situated somehow. Okay. Hair still looks good. Okay. Yeah, so like I said, I started 9 years ago and have always been kind of a creative, have done a lot of fun art and craft things on the side. Jewelry has always been just a huge love as far as like collecting and wearing jewelry. Ever since I was really little, I've always loved it. So it kind of makes sense that I ended up becoming a jewelry artist. But yeah, it really just started off as I want to make jewelry for myself, maybe make some for some friends. Etsy was really just kind of getting started. So I was really getting kind of sucked into that whole like maker world and online commerce. And so I found it really interesting. So my particular medium for many years was wire jewelry. It was very easy to get into. It was approachable. I saw like some things out there. And so I just started like kind of playing with it. My husband, actually, I'm going to back up real quick from the wire thing. Really what started me in the direction of the business aspects was I had ordered a catalog from a company where you can get jewelry supplies. So I was like, oh, I kind of want to get back into beading or whatever, just like, again, more hobby stuff. And my husband and I were out, I don't know where we were, but we were shopping and there was like some necklace. I was like, oh, that's really cute. I was thinking about buying it. And he was like, well, I was looking at that catalog and it looks like all the stuff that this necklace is made with, you could find in that catalog. And so we had kind of talked about it, you know, as we're like shopping through the store. And I was like, well, do you just want to get me some stuff, you know, whatever, $80 worth of jewelry supplies instead of this $80 necklace? And so that's what he did. And I was like, cool, I get all these like fun things I get to make stuff with. So I bought beads, some findings, and some really basic tools. And I loved it. I really enjoyed it. I made myself a necklace. I made some little earrings. And then again, like Etsy was becoming this kind of big thing at the time. And so that really kind of piqued my interest in like, okay, maybe I could make this into a business. So going back into like the wire as a medium, it was something I found really attractive. And so I just started playing with it. With copper, just like practicing, and then moved into stainless steel and just like progressed from there. I didn't initially start a business. I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. And I was just like, sure, I could just sell this. So I did. I would sell from like my coworkers. The first time I had actually like gone to an event to sell my stuff and like set it up on a table next to the farmers market years ago was the Winona Artisan Market, which I'll talk about a little bit more later because that's also a part of my business story. But that's where I had my first opportunity to like sell my work. And it seemed to go over well. People really enjoyed it. And so it really like got me really got me excited about the prospect of this becoming a business for me. So I didn't have a lot of people to turn to as far as like who to ask questions. I did a lot of research on the internet. I went to the library, checked out like all the books on like how to start a business. What are you supposed to do? Which in hindsight now, I'm just like, oh, that was a lot, but it's what you do when you don't know, right? You try to find as much information as possible. So what I ended up figuring out is that I could start a business as a sole proprietor. And that is like the easiest entryway to getting yourself established as a business, basically on paper. You file with the state, I can't remember. Well, it's also called doing business as a DBA, and I can't remember if that's what Minnesota calls it now. Either or. And so it's basically you're saying that I am going to do business as this name. So I'm Jovy Rockey. I'm going to do business as Jovy Rockey Jewelry, or, whatever you want to call it. And so that's just like starting your business, filing the legal paperwork of saying like, hey, I'm this person who's selling goods or services in the state of Minnesota. And so I did that. That's where I started. A few years into that, the friend of mine who was hosting the Winona Artisan Market that I had mentioned, she ended up deciding she didn't want to continue with it. And so she asked me if I was interested in facilitating this event. And I was like, yeah, I have a lot of ideas. I think that'd be really cool. I'm coming to every market anyway. I mean, that was like really where I got myself started. So at that point, as a event host, the city requires, if you're going to be using any of their public property, a certain amount of liability insurance. And so as my sole proprietorship, I didn't take out any sort of business insurance. It was like very bare bones. Like I just registered that. I got my tax identification numbers and your federal stuff, which I shared a document with Brian that will have some of those resources on there for you to reference. But basically I just got that stuff in order. But with the liability aspects, it made me really rethink what my business was. Because we were doing the event in a parking lot, my concern was if someone were, let's say someone tried to pull into that parking lot because we blocked it off and a child was hit, a person was hit by a car. I don't want to be personally liable for paying any out-of-pocket potential expenses. So at that point, I started looking at forming a limited liability company. And basically an LLC just, you're, again, on paper, you're creating a separate entity from yourself. So when you're a sole proprietor, the money you take in is getting taxed by you. You're going to file it under your own personal taxes. You can use your personal bank account, but it's not recommended. There's a number of things that it just kind of, how do I explain this? Am I explaining this right? The LLC just becomes a different part of you. So if you were to get into, let's say you took out loans under your business and then you weren't able to honor those loans, depending on the nature of the loan, the LLC would be the one responsible for that. So they're not going to be able to take your personal assets, like your home, for instance, or property that you own. Which was it just was a concern for me with the nature of what I was doing with the event organizing and again in public space and all of that. It was the direction that I wanted to go in. But if I hadn't done that, I probably to this day would, well, up until I opened the brick and mortar, I would probably still be a sole proprietor. Just because it is like the easiest entry. But anyway, so yeah, I did that a few years after I started the sole proprietorship. I merged the two businesses, which was a whole other thing. But at the time I had two different things going on. But now, like I just started another doing business as name under that LLC. So the LLC just like serves as this umbrella. And then I have Jovy Rockey Jewelry under that umbrella. I have what our brick and mortar rebrand will be, which will be Orno Gift and Home. And so all of that is under this LLC titled Driftless Events LLC, because that's what I was doing at the time. The beauty of an LLC is you can have a number of things that you're doing under that umbrella, and that just kind of serves as your main host of these branches that you might be, doing. You might have an e-commerce business that's like a totally separate thing, and you can file a doing business as under that. But yeah, that's really like the most basic way I can explain it. Yeah, at this point, I have, if there's any like recommendations that I could make is find a decent accountant that you can talk to about things. I did, again, a lot of the cursory stuff in the very beginning. I just researched and figured it out the best way I could. As my business grew and I started seeing the numbers go up, my taxes were going up. I ended up getting an incredible accountant. I use Rick Carlson. They're in the same building as the chamber. And he has been just a great resource for me as far as like asking questions, am I doing my bookkeeping correctly? Because I do all of my own bookkeeping, but I have him do all of my tax preparation. And then stuff that I get stumped on, I immediately go to him. It is an expense, but the beauty of that is that expense can be written off by your business. I won't get too far into the minutia of bookkeeping or anything like that, but yeah, I would say that is one piece of advice. If you are thinking you want to skip the sole proprietorship and do the LLC, it is more expensive. There's a couple ways to do it. Mine is a single member, so it's still just me. Otherwise, if you're in a partnership with an individual or multiple people, you can have a multi-member LLC. And there's pros and cons, but you have like basically an organization structure that you're submitting to the state, and you're telling them like these are the owners, these are the officers are the people who help with the day-to-day things. Some folks prefer to hire an attorney to do that, and it may just depend on the type of business that you're doing. Because of the nature of mine, I didn't feel it really warranted the need of an attorney because it was pretty straightforward. But if you're getting involved with like partnerships and multiple people, I would probably recommend talking to an attorney, at least doing a consultation and tell them what you're doing, what kind of business you're trying to start, what, people are involved in it, just so that you have that information before you make any big decisions or sign a contract with a partner. Yeah, I think those are like the two biggest takeaways. It's not too daunting. Don't be scared. It's really just a little bit of paperwork, especially that sole proprietorship. I mean, you can do it right online with the state of Minnesota. I think it's like $56 or $58, and you can, have it registered in like 10 minutes. It's pretty straightforward. And the nice thing about it is the state of Minnesota really the Secretary of State is who you do it through. And their website is really easy to use. They're really great about if you just want to call them and ask someone a bunch of questions. I've done that too. Because when I first started, I had read information about like local business licenses. And for my particular business, there is no like local license from the city of Winona. Which was something that I had kind of gone rounds with because I called the city and told them I want to start a business. What kind of business license do I need? And they said, well, you need to call the Secretary of State. So I called the Secretary of State and they're like, well, you're going to have to call the city to make sure you don't need something else from it. So, really, there just wasn't anything that Winona requires, but depending on where you are, there may be some requirements. So yeah, information is key for sure.
So Joey, there's a good question in the chat from Nicole on how do you value your time and services?
I guess, is that in reference to like how you like price your time and services? Or, I mean, as far as like, I put a high value on my time. Now, I did not used to do that. Again, depending on what you are doing, if this is just like a side hustle thing, you might, you know, have to kind of really like chip away at whatever your end goal is. If you're trying to make a full-time gig out of it, you are going to spend a lot of time, a lot of time that you will not get paid for. But it is an investment. And that's what I've always seen it as, is like, I used to think like, oh, it's just my time, it's not a big deal, but it is a big investment in the long run. Your time is valuable, especially as you start juggling lots of different things. Like for instance, what I do every day is very overwhelming sometimes because I wear a lot of the hats. I used to have a full-time employee in my brick and mortar. She left at the beginning of 2020, and then it's just been me up until recently, other than with like a couple of friends who help me out on the weekends. Carrie is one of them, occasionally, who just like will come and shop sit for me. But, you know, I'm the person who, you know, does all of the merchandising. I do the pricing, I make jewelry, I order, I pay bills, I do the bookkeeping, I do a lot of the cleaning. It's just like every single hat is what I wear. And so now I'm much more discerning about how I use my time. I am trying to get better about paying people for their services to help my business, so that I am not just spending time doing a bunch of other odds and ends work that need to be done. They're important for the business, but realizing that there's just a point in time where you can't be the one doing it all. I don't know if that like really answers the question fully. But I think it is important to value your time and services. And if you're a product-based business, especially a creative, you're making things, you're using your time. It is really, I can't stress enough that it is really important that you reflect that value and how you price your goods, because for everyone else that is in the same business as you, if you are devaluing yourself because you think you're just getting started or whatever, it kind of devalues everyone as a collective. I talk a lot about this in jewelry. You know, you have gotten, you know, you get to a point where you're selling stuff because you practiced, you honed, you made the mistakes, you wasted materials, you spent the time, you did all and plus all of the background things of like getting your business off the ground. You should pay yourself for that. You know, just because like something might cost, you know, X amount of dollars to make, and you're thinking of just the materials, your time is just your time, and your willingness to practice and hone your craft, whatever it may be, need to be valued and need to be reflected in that. And then it just helps everyone collectively that's in that same type of work as you, because the outsider who doesn't create or isn't selling that product or doesn't own a business does not realize all of those aspects that go into that product and that pricing. So I'm a big advocate for pricing well.
And Nicole, let us know. You can either come off mute and jump in and say, or in the chat too, if that answered the question. Jovy, maybe one more, and Nicole, certainly, yeah, jump into the chat or just jump in and interrupt me too. Jovy, maybe just one question. Is there anything, as we're thinking about sort of advice to share, especially for folks just getting started? I mean, is there any sort of like dead end path or something you spent a bunch of time on that just like, if you were able to do it over again, it would just be like, boy, I could have saved 20 hours if I had known, you know?
I think of like a really concrete example. I think, well, especially now, I mean, 9 years ago, things were so different in the world of e-commerce and web presence, and it's always ever evolving. And we've seen, of course, in this last year, like how much more prevalent it is in our lives. I would say that I did not start a website. I didn't have like that sort of presence in the beginning. I wish I would have done it sooner. And I even still now, I'm not great at it. I don't have all my products on there. It's really hard. And I'm just now getting to like at 9 years later, I'm getting to the point where I'm paying someone to just develop a website for me instead of doing drag and drop, because I want it to be more commerce friendly. And I really wish I would have done that sooner, I guess, and just invested a little bit upfront instead of saying, oh, I can do it myself. Because I'm the kind of person who's like, I can do it all myself. I'll just figure it out. That's like my key phrase. I tell my husband that all the time. I'll just figure it out. And you can, but it's worth just sometimes paying someone to help you along, and it'll go much faster and much easier.
Yeah, great. And maybe one last question, and then we'll move on to Christy. And Carrie asked, what made you really make that decision to go to brick and mortar rather than stay in e-commerce?
Well, I traveled a lot, and I am a shopper also, and I love a good brick and mortar experience, like a shop to walk into that just like triggers, good feelings. And I also saw a need in Winona. So what I had envisioned was something I just hadn't quite seen in this area. And so I wanted to kind of capitalize on that and like kind of build on that dream. And I also needed studio space. So I had spent all those years in a really small corner with like one workbench of my basement right next to the laundry, which I would always like interrupt myself and be like, well, I could just do a load of laundry. Like it was just really hard for me to work at home and continue like the growth that I needed to get. And also tools and like being able to maneuver. I live in a pretty small house, and it was not ideal anymore. And because there wasn't really much studio space, traditional or artist studio space in Winona, I started looking at commercial spaces. And the store was always something that had been like a long time dream. Probably 6 years ago is when I first started making calls about different spaces in downtown and just like getting a feel for like, what is the cost? What is that going to look like? What are the average utilities? And then just like every so often when things would come available, I would call and just ask and get information, and I would go look at them. And so it was just, that part was always ticking back there, but this was like the time where I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, because like I was moving into my jewelry business full time, and I was like, if I'm going to do this, like I really need to do this, which was really daunting at first. But then the location lent itself to be a place that was really beautiful and perfect. And so that just like, it made sense for me to kind of do both, like have this studio and then also have a brick and mortar. And then I figured if it didn't work out, if it didn't seem like the store was worthwhile or it wasn't something that would work out, I would keep the studio space and then continue doing what I had been doing, which was art festivals and kind of doing that network. And then expanding on my wholesale and, just really focusing on my jewelry. But here I am, I have 2 commercial spaces now, and the brick and mortar is doing well, and still making jewelry and figuring it all out, even despite COVID-19. So.
Thanks, Jovy. And I really appreciate you sharing your story and answering some questions. And we'll do a couple of rounds of this. So we'll bring on Christy, and then I'll talk a bit about nonprofit. And then as questions emerge, just put them in the chat and we'll collect them and kind of come back to conversation at the end. So Christy, maybe this is a great opportunity. No, it's not yet. Thanks, Jovy. I will give you our virtual applause. We're not in a shared space, so it's a weird, silent kind of, just close your eyes and imagine being in a shared space and people clapping and speaking of the surrealness of COVID. So thank you. And Christy, let's turn to you and the floor and the spotlight is yours.
Perfect. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. My name is Christy Ransom. I'm the president and CEO of the Winona Area Chamber of Commerce, and I'm just going to share a little bit of my background before I start in on, what the chamber can do, and then what I know about small businesses and entrepreneurship and starting a small business. And it's worth noting that we are also a nonprofit. So there's a whole world of nonprofits, but we have a 501c3. The chamber itself is a 501c6. So there's different categories of nonprofits too. But my background from my very first job in hospitality led into a lot of different worlds, but my dad owned a business, a bar, a restaurant, and a catering company. So at about 17 years old, I started 16, I started working for him, 17. By 18, I had already done all of his invoicing, billing, catering proposals, ordering inventory, payroll, QuickBooks, cooked in the kitchen, served, bartended. I learned everything that he did, and not to take over his business, just because that is how my brain works. I'm wired with curiosity. And I think if school were free, I'd go for the rest of my life because I love learning things. So that opened up a whole different possibility for me in the world of business. So I've worked in multiple facets, from having my own business to being a general manager in a large retail company in a mall in the metropolitan area, to being the general manager of a bar, restaurant, and event center, all sorts of different things. So that helped me in the chamber world because it helps you be able to understand what people are going through in different aspects of business, whether it's in leadership or whether it's in starting your own business. And there's things you learn even in management about how a business is run, when a business is run well, when it's run poorly, and how that translates, because you see it all. So, and from big corporate to locally owned. The restaurant that I was a general manager for is owned by Representative Dave Baker, or was at the time. So small business, he was a small business owner. He started it from square one and built it into something that's pretty incredible. It's at a golf course, and the golf course bought it from him to help sustain themselves. So, which is fine because he's now been in the legislature for 3 terms, maybe 4 now. So he was ready to let that go probably, but you get to see how people do things well and how people don't. And I think you'll see that from small business to big business all across your life. So whether that's here in Winona or whether that's, in another state, in another city, it's very synonymous, and you'll see that. You'll see who does it right and who does it wrong. From a Chamber of Commerce standpoint, our whole purpose is we're in business for business. That's what we do. That's who we serve. Part of what we do, we have an economic development committee, and the whole purpose of this committee is to really help our region, Winona area, prosper economically. And we're really leaning into entrepreneurs. And it's pretty important to note that, Jovy is a really prime example of somebody that had a vision and a dream, something that she loved to do, and turned it into a business. And that happens small, and it happens with people that, Watkins, it was a guy peddling a product that turned into something that's pretty magnificent. And we here in the Winona area are just a bunch of entrepreneurs. So it's really exciting. So everything from Fastenal down, top to bottom, every one of them started with a dream like Jovy's. And that's really exciting to understand and to take, kind of perspective on. From my standpoint, we have a startup business book, and it's kind of exciting because through the pandemic, while everybody was, trying to figure out life, we all were really, I can't imagine, I tell you how many business owners I had call crying over the course of the last year. But what I have also realized is we have the most resilient business owners I have ever seen in all of my almost 44 years of life. But we have a Start a Business book. It's a guide that we put together. It's got a lot of information. We're rebuilding it right now, and putting out a new copy, but we gave out more of those in the last 6 months than we have in probably the last 4 years combined. So that's exciting. So what this has prompted is a whole bunch of people that thought, you know what, I need a better plan. I need and maybe they already had a business, and it's now kind of what Jovy had explained is, okay, now I need to change up some things, or I need to do something different, or maybe I just don't understand. I think there's so many things that we get asked from businesses or people that are looking to start a business. Jovy pointed out one, where do I get a business license? That is, you're always going to call the city or your community development office. And, whether you need one or you don't, it really depends on the city that you're starting your business in. You do need to register with the Secretary of State. So how do you do that? That's all in this book. There's resources for that at the Secretary of State website. What I realized going through grant processing for the county is there's a lot of businesses that aren't registered with the Secretary of State because they just didn't know they had to. That's the important part of having a good accountant. A good accountant will make sure that you're doing that. And some accountants will actually do it for you because it is something that you have to do. Do you have to pay sales tax? That's going to depend on what type of business you are. And if you're a sales business, of course, you'll get those answers at the Minnesota Department of Revenue online. You can get all those frequently asked questions. How do you get a tax ID number? Those are things that, again, going through the Department of Revenue, you'll find that information out. Do you need an employer ID number? Go to the IRS. They'll tell you how you go about that and what you need to have. Building permit information. What if you're buying a building? What if you're renting a building? What does the zoning look like? Do you need industrial or commercial zoning if you're buying a building? Where do you find that out? The city engineer can help you with that stuff. If you're interested in a building, maybe it's downtown, how do you find out who the property owner is? So you can, if there's a vacant building, there's tons of them all over. So how do you find that out? You can go to the assessor's office and they will tell you who owns the building to give them a call, or you can come to us. We have a lot of that information as well. Do you need a food permit? Who do you reach out to for that if you're looking into food service? So there's a lot of those kinds of questions. But the more important questions, I think, when everybody, when you're thinking about starting a business, you have an idea, the concept is the most important part. Is it translatable? Who is your ideal customer? How does it fill? What need does it fill? Knowing all of that stuff is really important. What is your personal financial situation? As Jovy said, if you're going into a sole proprietorship or an LLC, how does that translate? What does that look like? What are your management skills like? Maybe you're a maker, but not a good manager, and you might need to hire somebody to help you with that if that's, a world that you need assistance with. Financing, how to find the right person to help you. There's so many different lenders, and there's so many different places to go for financing. And I would really steer people to the SBDC, the Small Business Development Center, because Mark Thine is our local representative, and he will really guide you and help you in understanding all the checklists, everything that you need to know when you're getting started or maybe transitioning. Maybe it's that you're growing so fast and now you need to make some better decisions or different decisions. That's a really good place to start. There's really a lot of information that he's going to guide you through, but he might actually be able to get you to the right person to finance you. So, if that's whether you're going to an area banker or whether you're going to a development association or whether you're going to a foundation for a grant, there's venture capitalists. I mean, whatever, go to Shark Tank, I don't know, but he's wonderful, and he'll help guide you in that process too. And I would say, reaching out to different business professionals, talking to people like Jovy, or, if you're looking into starting a restaurant or a food truck, talking to someone that's already doing those things and learning what they learned along the way, asking those questions, sitting down with somebody and learning from them. that's probably the best way that you can learn about business, is by talking to someone in business. Know your competition, identify it. What sets you apart from them? Making sure that you always know how you're different, so that there's not 5 people doing the same thing and then somebody's irrelevant. So you have to find a way to stand out. And if you have competition, again, food service is one of those big things. I can get a hamburger at probably 15, 20 places within, you know, a 10-mile radius. So what stands one apart from another? What makes Jovy different than, you know, the retailer down the road? Those are important. Know your target market. Who are you going after? Who are you going to promote to? That will help you understand if social media, how to market yourself on social media, how to brand yourself, how to target your market through advertising, or whether that's social media, whether that's online presence, whether that's radio or TV or newspaper. And everybody in every service has a different niche and a different way to market their business. You know, social media is really relevant right now, and an e-commerce site is really important if you're in retail. And that's going to be different if you're in a different type of industry. So knowing that is really important. Knowing your business idea and being able to evaluate that and going through that with the proper, you know, your lender. I also would really highly recommend, and I think I might come at this a little bit differently than Jovy because of what we went through with grant processing and working with over almost 300 businesses. I would really recommend at least sitting down with an attorney and finding out. But again, you want to know who's the best fit. So you can have consultations. There's some that will not charge you for that. So that's important to know. Do that research. Starting a business is expensive. It's something that you have to really plan for, and you don't want to waste money throwing things at people that you are never going to work with. So find out who can do a free consultation with you, or who would be willing to share information on the phone or guidance. But finding an attorney is really important, especially if you're not sure if you want to be a sole proprietor, and what's the benefit of that? An LLC, what's the benefit of that? What is the tax implications of those things? Because that also is important to understand when you are having a business. What is the liability? What is the insurance? What does all of that stuff look like? The planning of, is it important to have a brick and mortar for my type of business? Do I need one? Will I need staff? What does that look like? How do you price yourself out? And I will tell you, as a small business owner myself, formerly, that you should always pay yourself. Find a way to pay yourself. Don't put everything back into the business, but you do have to fund your business. So you have to know how to fund that separately. But you're an employee. You're an owner, but you're an employee. Make sure that you're feeding your family. That's critical. And I've seen that a lot, especially with sole proprietors, that they don't pay themselves what they're worth and what they deserve. So those are some of my biggest takeaways and kind of some of my biggest input, I guess, as the chamber organization. And then know that I guess I'm going to give a shameless plug about the chamber, because what we do is really, we have a new mission statement, and our mission statement is we help businesses how and when they need us. And that's for me, because I'm a servant leader and I really care about every business, and every business needs different things. So they align with us and partner with us for different things. But what we really lean into is ways to market your business, ways to gain visibility. And that can be through, I mean, a lot of people know about networking and different things like that, but there's economic development and advocacy. And, you know, this year, especially, I can tell you that's all I've done. I feel like all I have done is advocacy for an entire year of my life, from the city to Washington, DC. So advocating for you, being your voice, uplifting all of that. And then, you know, there's things that we now do and are leaning into for specifically for small businesses, for nonprofits, for bigger businesses. Everybody needs something different. So we have a place for all of that. And while there is fees to be a part of the chamber to partner with us, that is 100% tax deductible for your business. So it's a tax write-off for you to, it's an investment in your business. So know that, and whether you align with the chamber or not, we're always here to help you. And I think it's really important to note that everything that we do, businesses benefit from, whether they're partnered with us or not. That's our goal, is to really help you succeed and help our community thrive economically. So, but those are my biggest words of advice, I guess.
Yeah, and thanks, Christy. That was a ton of really good information and covered a lot of the bases. I mean, I did share a couple of resources in the chat as you were talking. I was looking them up as I went. I mean, one thing I would appreciate you checking me on is I did find a link to the How to Start a Business guide. I don't know if it's the most recent one. Okay, you're shaking.
No, but that's the only one that's published right now. So we are in the process. We have all of the information compiled, but it's being put into a really nice, fancy, brand new, jazzy book that will look a lot better than the last one and has a lot more information. We actually, our economic development committee really stepped up, but we have, one of our board members is from Dunlap and Seeger. So there is information as an attorney, an employment attorney, but not like, hey, this is what we would do, but this is what you should know from a business standpoint. So there's tons of different information that's coming out. So watch for a new one. We also have a new website coming. So for those of you that attended last week, you got to a little glimpse of our new website with Maggie Panetta from Tree Dome. She's doing an amazing job. I think she's working with you, Jovy, as well, but she's fantastic and I love her. And so the new book will be on the new website. So thanks,
Great.
Brian.
Oh yeah, and as for that plug, so the new website, is that Winona Chamber, the website addresses?
It will be, the new website will be the same, but right now it's not live yet. So it's just about ready to go. We're just finishing up our Chamber Master integration, which is our business directory, event calendar, that kind of stuff. So when it's ready to go, it'll be the same as our old one. Our old one will go away and that one will be taking its place.
Great. And there's a question, maybe I do want to mention, so Mark Thine with the SBDC was mentioned a few times and got some shout outs in the chat. Could you talk a little bit more about that? You or Jovy or somebody who's experienced? Is it my understanding that he's a free resource or is he available for anybody to reach out to?
Yes, anyone can reach out to Mark. It's kind of like DEED. So that's another place, another resource, Department of Economic and Employment and Economic Development. They're a wonderful resource as well. But Mark Thine at the SBDC, that is a free resource for you. You can go to him. He will help you along the way. He'll guide you to people that you need to talk to. So.
Yeah, I'll echo that. Mark is great. When I first started thinking about a store, he was one of the first people that I had talked to, and just talking out kind of the business plan and aspects and who I'm serving and like just a lot of facets that needed, like I needed prompts from someone because again, I didn't really know what I was doing. And I mean, that was long before I actually started the brick and mortar, but he is amazing to work with. I also used to manage at Island City Brewing Company. And I know when they started their business, Mark really helped them hone, a lot of the aspects of like what they wanted the brewery to be, help them come up with a business plan. He is a really incredible resource. So I would say use him for sure.
Thanks, Jovy, and thanks, Christy. And so Mark's contact is in the chat. One thing I'll mention at the end of our time together too, is if you go to engagewinona.org, there's a link on the homepage for these series of workshops. Each one of those, as they finish, we will be sharing links from these conversations. And so it'll include everything from the chat and a few other places. There's some great links. As Christy mentioned, if you weren't able to attend or watch last week, there's a really nice link to like, how do I get started on my own website? And things will be populated there. And then just to speak it into this video, as people may be watching this now or later, SBDC, Mark Thine, Thein, SBDC standing for Small Business Development Corporation. Come with SB. I should have gotten this right before I decided to speak it out. And so if you search that or search for rochestersbdc.com, you'll find it there, and those resources will be there. Maybe before I transition to myself, Christy, Carrie had a question in the chat. Do you recommend I start with an attorney, accountant, or insurance agent? And is one better? And will they tell me what order to go to the rest of them in?
That's a great question, Carrie. And you know what? I think they're all important. You know, if you start with the attorney is going to help you develop what type of business that you need to be for your plan. So if you're a nonprofit, obviously that's a 501c3, and there's all sorts of legal implications that go along with that. So I would say for nonprofits especially, an attorney is essential. You need to know what laws that you have to abide by and what implications that you have. The next person is going to be your accountant, probably. That's money matters, and they're going to take care of you, and they're going to help you in conjunction with that attorney. So once you've decided what kind of business plan that you're going to be, if you're going, and the accountant will have some of that information too. And if you're like Jovy, that you're just, I'm just a do-it-myself kind of gal, you can find all that information. There's, I mean, the Department of Revenue and IRS will have, the Minnesota Department of Revenue and the actual federal IRS will have all that information as to, you know, what type of businesses they are, how to define them, and you can kind of figure that out. The accountant will help you if it's complicated like a nonprofit. I think that's what you said you were interested in. An attorney will be really important. Insurance, they'll tell you all of that. So again, I think there's no real order of talking to someone, but I think, you know, it's going to start with what type of business am I? That's going to dictate what kind of insurance you need. Do you have a brick and mortar? Are you working out of your home? All of that stuff. If you're going to farmers markets, all of your insurance is a little bit different, and that's going to be dictated by what type of business that you decide to start and how that is facilitated. So do you have employees? I mean, obviously then you have work comp, and you have, there's a lot of other types of insurance that you have to deal with. So they're all important, Carrie, to answer that question. I don't think there's a right or wrong order, but I would say the insurance is probably the last person after you've figured out your business plan and what type of business you're having and where you're going to locate your business and, you know, all that stuff, staff, that kind of stuff. Insurance then comes after that.
Great, thanks, Christy. And so I'll offer a round of virtual quiet applause for, well, I guess you can hear me clapping, so you got that. So thank you. I mean, we really appreciate you and Jovy being here tonight and sharing your expertise. And I think, I mean, to me, like a really awesome take-home message for this workshop and all of the workshops we're doing is that there's such an abundance of local resources right here in our backyard. And as Christy talked about, Jovy talked about, a number of folks who are really willing and able and interested to help and to support and answer questions, and whether they're able to answer them themselves or just point you in the right direction. I think what was really nice about both of those stories, there's a nice thread of finding support and finding local support. And I was going to say not being afraid to reach out and ask, but maybe it's like being afraid and doing it anyway, you know, and just reaching out and asking and finding that support. So I will, as I open this hour and a half together, I'm Brian with Engage Winona and representing sort of the nonprofit side of things. Crystal Higgy with the Advocacy Center of Winona was hoping to join us tonight and is not feeling well. And so she sends her regards to everybody. She has a really unique story as the executive director of the Advocacy Center, as one of the founders of the Frozen River Film Festival, and as the owner of a small business, a long-term vacation and event rental called Heggy Haven. But she wanted me to extend an invitation for folks to reach out either through me or through this workshop here tonight, or just directly to her. She's happy to talk and answer questions and kind of offer support and resources too, which I guess is just another indication of that nice sort of support system here. So I will work to sort of pick up the slack on the nonprofit side and just talk maybe a little bit about my personal story, but sort of more around some of kind of the nonprofit pieces, what it takes to start a nonprofit. And I think really around that question that I know a lot of folks approach Engage Winona with, which is, like, do I want to start a nonprofit? I have this idea. Do I need a nonprofit? Which is an incredibly worthy question, and we'll talk about that a little bit. My background, so I won't go too deep into my Genesis story, but my previous professional experience here was as the editor of the daily newspaper, which was a very different sort of reality than I have now. I was working for this for-profit corporation and managing a fairly large staff, and moved into the world of nonprofits, both because I really believed in this idea of sort of public and community ownership of a mission-driven organization. And I really believed specifically in the vision of Engage Winona. I think there's a thread in all of these conversations of passion really driving. And I think in my experience, and I know in a lot of folks I know who have started small businesses or nonprofits, it's been that passion to make this thing happen that kind of gets you over the hard stuff. And it's been my experience that if that's there, you will find answers and creative answers and ways of getting through all of the barriers. And if it's not there, it's a place for honest reflection to maybe then take a pause and go find that thing. Because in multiple times during the journey, when things got hard, it really forced that reflection of like, is this what I wanted to be doing? And ultimately what I wanted to be doing was community building. We were able to do that to some degree in journalism, but it always felt flat when we would tell a really good story about a really pressing social issue and then just kind of cross our fingers and hope somebody else would do something about it. And that got frustrating to me after a while. And I wanted to sort of move upstream to this world of what Engage Winona represents, which is this idea of building community and driving local change making. And I won't go into the rabbit hole about what it is we do and all the ways we do it, but our work is really around this idea of doing everything we can to ensure that everybody in community has voice and access and power in decision making and planning. And the recognition that some folks have a lot of that and some folks don't have a whole lot of that at all, and wanting to kind of level that playing field. Engage Winona is a full-time nonprofit. I'm an employee of Engage Winona. I'm the only employee. It is now, wow, is it today? Somewhere around here is our 4-year anniversary. I don't remember what it is exactly, which shows you how busy you get with these things. But it's been a full-time job for me for 4 years. And so I have kind of that founder's story, but this larger community story of building it. It emerged from just a series of community conversations. And what transitioned it to a nonprofit, I think a question I get a lot when folks ask, do I want to start a nonprofit? Which is like, how did you know when something moves from being just a community project to a nonprofit? And I think for us was for me personally wanting to do it for full time. And I struggle with like saying that out loud because it's like a mission driven organization. It's a community driven organization. I don't want it to be about me, but in a lot of ways, the motivation to start it came from that. I think it's worthy of mentioning that simply because starting a nonprofit is a viable, it's social entrepreneurship. It's a viable employment opportunity. It's possible to do that. And so it's possible to have a good job running a nonprofit. It's certainly, if you wanted to choose between nonprofit and corporate world, you will find more money elsewhere, but it's not, it's a viable employment opportunity. Is maybe part of the journey. That the really key piece I'll mention is that the first thing Engage Winona did, we didn't know if it was going to work. And so we didn't want to go through all of the work of doing all the IRS paperwork and writing the bylaws and figuring out all the books and doing all that stuff until we had a better sense that this idea was actually a viable business model. And so we used this really amazing partnership that nonprofits have available to them called Fiscal agency. And that essentially means you just partner with another nonprofit. You get to use their nonprofit status. They can do accounting and administrative overhead for you based on how you make that relationship. And that kind of gives you a runway then to determine, is my business model going to work? And then if it does, then you can go ahead and sort of build your own structure and build your own model. And if it doesn't, then it's really easy then to step back and sort of intentionally close it. We worked with the Winona Community Foundation, which I know is open to offering that to other folks in some circumstances. So we went to the Community Foundation and said, we want to start this community engagement nonprofit. We don't know if it's going to work. Can you provide administrative and accounting overhead for us for 18 months? And at that point, we'll sort of know if it's going to work or not. And they do that, and they do it for like a really small fee. It's a few $100s a year on the low end. And maybe at the high end, it's less than, well, if you're making a lot of money, it's a good problem to have. So it's somewhere between like 3 and 5%. So it's a really good relationship. And I know Nancy at the Community Foundation is always open to those conversations. So that's a really good place to approach if you're considering starting a nonprofit and not sure whether it's going to work and not wanting to go through all the work. And so we did that for 2 years and realized very quickly it was going to be successful, and started building the structure, and then became independent about a year after we established that relationship. But it's a really valuable piece of it. And here we are 4 years later. I mean, I think what I would like to do is sort of transition to talk about some of these sort of general, and the other piece that we do often at Engage Winona is, and to offer ourselves as a resource, is that we serve as a resource for folks wanting to ask these questions. So I'm happy to present myself as a resource to have conversation. We have conversations with folks regularly around this question: do I want to start a nonprofit? And I'll just kind of cover some of the general questions we get, and so how folks enter into that. And the one is, we always advise folks, ask yourself why a nonprofit. Typically, folks have a community project, they have a festival, or they have a program, or they're offering a service, and they just don't know if they want it to be something larger. And typically, our advice is usually focused on that financial piece. And so if you're looking to get grants, that's a really key reason to start a nonprofit. If you're looking for tax-deductible donations, it's a really key way to start a nonprofit. Most importantly, if you're expecting and hoping to bring in a decent amount of revenue, because if you don't have a nonprofit and you're just running community events, we worked with a woman who was doing block parties and was just had a lot of cash and things moving through. I mean, paying bands and taking donations, and it was just sort of a mess. And that can happen that way in a hurry with community projects. So it gives a good way of sort of isolating the financial piece. And then also too, if you're interested in paying yourself a wage and a salary. So a lot of those questions around starting a nonprofit are really around the financial piece. Because the other question we get a lot is, are there alternatives? And often the answer is absolutely. I talked about the fiscal agency relationship, and that's something folks sometimes will extend for a long time. I talked about our community foundation relationship was up to 2 years. We had 2 whole years to figure out whether this was going to work or not. And in the meantime, for a really nominal fee, they took care of all the bookkeeping, they took care of all the tax reporting, they took care of like all that hard, complicated stuff that typically somebody doesn't want to focus on when they just want to deliver programs. It's really worth noting that tax-deductible donations, the desire for that has shifted in a lot of ways. And this is like probably its own class. We could just kind of nerd out on why this is, some tax laws and some other generational issues. But it isn't always the case that people are exclusively looking for tax deductions in their donations. And this feels like heresy sort of saying this at an event sort of co-sponsored by the Nonprofit Alliance. So, don't tell anybody, I guess. But we support, and by offering resources and things to a number of really wonderful community projects that have no intention of becoming a nonprofit. And they take donations. They take donations through Venmo and GoFundMe and other crowdsourcing ways, and people will write them personal checks. And they're just donating because they love the work. They think it's really cool. They don't have any particular concern about getting tax-deductible donations. It's worth mentioning too that these are all almost exclusively smaller organizations. So these are not organizations that are providing folks with full-time funding or anything. But if you're looking on that smaller scale and thinking like, oh, I just want to do a couple events a year, I don't know if this is going to be full-time, you can certainly take donations and support and financial support without it being tax deductible or needing a legal structure. It's really just sort of gifts of one person providing that gift to another. So it's an option. And that the other thing we are always advising folks to do is really just do a field scan first and see who else is out there and what other folks are doing. More often than not, a couple of good conversations will lead to a partnership and will lead to some folks coming together and wanting to work on this together. So always just getting the sense of what's out there. And Engage Winona is really available for that too. We're always happy to talk folks through, are there other people doing this idea? Is there something that's similar in town? And then the other piece is what we really call is like 3 myths and a truth. There's like 3 common myths about nonprofits, and then there's one really kind of cold hard truth, but also it's a rich one too, is that a lot of folks will sort of not pursue starting a nonprofit out of this fear that it's really expensive. And it really isn't. The startup costs are less than $1,000, in some cases less than $500 for the filing fees. The second myth is that starting a nonprofit takes a ton of technical expertise. Well, like doubling and tripling the recommendation of consulting with lawyers and accountants. The cool thing about starting a nonprofit is that it's mission driven. You know, you're serving people, you're doing good, and it's not always, but more often than not, pretty easy to get. You know, it's a nonprofit is a nice sort of hat in hand model. You know, you can get a lot of donated services. We did work with a couple lawyers and an accountant. They thought Engage Winona had a cool business model, and so they offered a couple hours of service for free. And it doesn't take it takes work, but it doesn't take a ton of technical expertise. The tax forms aren't terribly. It depends on your comfortability level of tax forms, but you're capable of working through them if you go patiently and use Google as your friend. They're not so filled with legalese that they can be impossible to navigate. And that the other kind of big myth is that maintaining a nonprofit is really hard and really technically difficult. And that can be the case if you're running these big, complicated nonprofits. But if you start something for yourself and you can have a small board and very minimal kind of organizational overhead. I worked for a nonprofit once in the Twin Cities. It was a jazz nonprofit. And we had a board of 5 people that met 4 times a year. And we put on 3 or 4 events, and we took in maybe $10,000 and we spent it all on musicians. And if there was $10 left, you know, we donated to somebody else at the end of the year. And that was sort of the end of the, so it really wasn't terribly complicated to maintain it. So those are sort of the myths, that it can be really expensive, that it takes a ton of technical expertise, and that no matter what size you've started in a nonprofit at, that it's incredibly hard to run and maintain. None of those things are necessarily true, especially at the startup phase. And then when you start to get to those good problems to have, those tend to be triggered mostly by like 6-figure incomes at a nonprofit level. So it isn't until you're taking in more than $100,000 or $250,000 a year that you start to run into these really technical things. And at that point, I mean, at least I like to think about those as like really good problems to have, you know, that if you're starting to face an audit, it's because, hey, you got $250,000 in donations and grants last year. So you're in pretty good shape. The truth, those are the myths. The truth is that it does take a lot of work. It takes a lot of intention. It takes a lot of detail work. It does take some administration. I think as we've consulted other folks who have started nonprofits, some of them run into challenges thinking sort of the opposite is true, that once they get it started, they can just sort of forget about it. And that just doesn't really work that way. The IRS pays fairly close attention to nonprofits. You do need to file every year, even though if you don't make a lot of money, it's literally a postcard. But it does require kind of a really intentional and guiding hand. And a lot of folks will get into some kind of minor challenges or issues, or even lose their nonprofit because they just figure once it gets started and the IRS says yes, they can just sort of let it go and not worry about it too much. So that's a general overview. So I'm attempting to sort of cover and imagine some of the things that Crystal might have covered. I will share one resource in the chat. I mean, I will offer myself and Engage Winona as a resource because that's what we're here to do. We're here to help folks figure out how to do social change. And sometimes that includes starting a nonprofit. I also happen to be on the board of the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits, which is a wonderful statewide advocacy organization. And they have this incredible free resource that I think is entitled How to Start a Nonprofit, very cleverly titled. And they just have a list of, it's an online guide, it's free, and it walks you through step-by-step how to do it. And at every step, there's a website page that says, here's how to do this. Click here to download the form you need to file. Click here to file it. Click here to pay for it. It's a really nice guide, and it's provided there for free. So I put that in the chat. That'll be included on our website as we go. And that'll also allow me to not bore everybody to death when we start talking about 990s and bylaws and articles of incorporation. And that's a lot of the more of the technical stuff we can talk through as you get deeper into it. So
can I add something to that, being a
nonprofit? Please do.
So I think one of the most important things, I put it in the chat, but to note is that nonprofits net zero at the end of the year. Your balance should be 0 because everything that you get should fund your mission. So it's cool because nonprofits are mission driven. We all have our own mission, whether it's something as grandiose as the YMCA or, you know, as small as Frozen River Film Festival, which is, you know, there's multiple levels of nonprofits, right? But they all have a mission, and everything that they make goes back into funding that mission. So the chamber has a much larger annual budget than Engage Winona, probably, I would venture to guess, with the amount of employees that we have. Mm-hmm. But our budget that our board of directors approves every year. That's the other thing, is that a nonprofit is run by a board of directors. Whereas Jovy gets to make all her executive decisions all by herself. I have bosses, 15 of them. So Jeff knows all about this. But the beauty of that too is you have 15 voices to help guide your way, right? So that's great, and guide your mission. But at the end of the day, our budget at the end of the year balances. It's zero. If we make money, that's great. It's going to go back into something. Or it's going to go into reserves that we can use in a year like we did last year. So when you have a crisis, you have reserves to tap into. But we're not designed to be profitable. We're designed to use every inch of the dollars that are donated to us that are tax deductible. So that's important to note. The other thing that I will say is we do schedule an audit. We do a scheduled audit every single year. That's just something we have decided to do. You don't have to. And I guess that just depends on how big you are, how small you are, or where you are. But we do it just because, as Brian said, we tend to be targeted. So we're just ahead of it, auditing ourselves and paying for that. We pay for an audit every single year. That also, if you are a smaller nonprofit, you maybe outsource your accounting. When I worked in Wilmer at the Chamber of Commerce, they had a CPA firm that did all of their books. Here, we have a beautiful woman named Kay, and she is a gift to us, and we love her. And she is a CPA herself, or an accountant by trade. That's her education. So she does all of our books internally. Because of that, it's really even more important to do a self-audit, because then everything that happens could get, I mean, if somebody were to do something, and it's going to happen in a nonprofit, I tell you what, it just dishonesty. I don't know what it is about nonprofits, but that it'll get caught. So it's good. And then bylaws are important, articles, all that stuff. Those are really important. And those are, talk to another nonprofit, talk to a Nancy Brown, find out the information that you can find out, because those are the most complicated parts of they're going to be the most complicated parts of the process, and everything else is fun. Everything else is fun.
That's a perfect frame. Yeah, thanks, Christy. And Christy mentioned three things. She mentioned the bylaws, the articles of incorporation, and then the board. And all of those things, I mean, the link from the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits is really valuable, because bylaws are important because they talk about how you govern your own organization, and especially how you make decisions and how the board makes decisions. Articles do the same thing, but a lot of those you don't have to create those from scratch. There's a lot of really good templates. There's a lot of really good things to build from, and they will give you a foundation to build from while allowing you to kind of think through how you might want to run your organization. So you don't have to worry about like finding a way to create these impossibly technical documents. And then especially too, because this event is really geared toward that startup phase, is that boards of directors, it's its own. I mean, there are people who just have careers consulting with other boards. I mean, it's sort of a big topic, but I think when you get started, and I know there's different opinions on this, but at least from what we always advise when you get started is just to go small. You can have a board of 4 or 5 folks. It's valuable for them to be people you have relationships with. And that doesn't mean they have to be your best friends, but it tends to be valuable to be able to start somewhere with folks who understand what you're doing, whether it's a team you put together or a group of friends. Like, all of that is okay when you're starting. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to find the lawyer and the banker and the accountant and everybody right away. You can start somewhere, and you can start from square one. Often there's a misconception that, like, oh, my board needs to be 20 members. I need to have X, I need to have Y, I need to have Z. Like, none of that needs to be true, and definitely not when you're starting. Like, it can be 4 friends hanging out, talking it over at your house until you get things rolling. The question from Carrie is a good one. And it's sort of like the earlier question around how do I price my stuff, which is so hard to answer sometimes and so unique. Is it at what point do you consider moving toward 501c3 status rather than continuing fiscal sponsorship? Christy, you may have some answers for that too. I mean, I would say there's a couple of trigger points, at least from my perspective. One is that if you're thinking about doing this, if you start with a fiscal sponsorship and it becomes clear that this is something that's going to be viable long-term and you want to stick with it in long-term, then it's worthy just to get rolling right away and getting the paperwork in. And I think the other piece of that, so if you're looking to do something long-term, fiscal agency is really just sort of a bridge. And you should never really treat it as sort of this long-term relationship, but just something that allows you to basically start operating on day one while building a nonprofit, which the paperwork we didn't talk about, but sometimes the IRS can take about 6 months to get back to you, which is a lot of time. And so if you have a mission and programs and events you want to do next week, fiscal agency can really help with that, because you get to do all your work for the first 6 months while you're just sitting on your hands waiting for the IRS to send you something in the mail that's dated 4 weeks past to tell you that they need your email address. And then you wait 2 months for them to respond. But that's a little facetious. I actually, when we applied, we had a really great relationship. We talked with a real woman who was out of Utah, and she gave us her personal phone number and she had questions and it got solved right away. So it was actually a really great experience. I think the other piece is when you're starting to consider larger grants and larger funding opportunities, fiscal sponsorship is really good for things that are small and simple and often don't involve paying yourself a salary. They're really good for like, I just want to try this project. I want to try to start this festival. And I just want to try one. Midwest Music Fest, I think, is a great example. They were a fiscal agent through the Community Foundation for a couple of years for the same reason. It was just, we just want to start this one thing and try it and start small. And then, so the tipping point for fiscal agents tends to be around 10,000 or so. And the Community Foundation is different. They're willing to do a long-term relationship. Other fiscal agents, when it starts to get, the budget gets more complicated, the amount gets to be above $10,000 or $15,000, when they realize that they might have to be paying you or paying someone or paying staff, that's when fiscal agency starts to not work in a hurry. It's really good for like a project or two, but if you're thinking long-term and you're thinking of paying yourself or you're thinking of paying other folks, it can help to move toward a 501c3. So Carrie, I don't know if that totally answers your question. That's a hard one. And it occurred to me too, I think that I will say from like a pricing and services standpoint from the nonprofit world, it's the same question. I think that for-profit, I don't think it's any different. I will say that I've had most success. We started a business here that didn't really have an equivalent. So I didn't have anybody really in my community to say like, how do you charge? How much do you charge for this contract? How much do you, like, where do we price this stuff? And so I kind of had to fly solo a little bit. I really benefited from being able to have open conversations with people who were looking to contract with us. The other thing I really benefited from, and this is less of a technical piece of advice, but more an emotional piece of advice, is I always use this thing I call the floor of resentment. So the floor of resentment basically means that like, at what level, if I ask for money to provide my time, labor, and energy, am I going to resent having done this? You know, so if I ask somebody for X amount of money and halfway through it, I'm just resenting it. You know, I'm just like, I can't, this is so much work and I should have asked for more and I can't believe I'm doing this. And then I get, you know, then you get upset at the person you're contracting with, which is not fair at all because you asked for it. They didn't, you know. And so I always think about that. And that tends to guide me at least to the lower level. Where I feel good about the work. Sometimes, you know, it's also a work in progress. I mean, I don't think we figured out how to price our contracts and our services until we've been doing this for 3 years. So I think I also was committed to taking a couple and looking back on hindsight and saying like, oh, we're never going to do that again, unless we get paid this amount. So
I think that's synonymous with the business in general. Jovy could probably relate to that too. What you learn in the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, it's don't be afraid to charge too much.
Mm.
Just go for it. You'll be surprised at how much people are willing to pay you. And for us entrepreneurs, we don't have deep pockets. So like Jovy said, you sit there and go, well, I have a website. I don't have $1,000. I'm going to figure out how to do a website. And when I've advised, I'm I teach photography at the college level, and say, how do you start? I go, just make sure you charge enough that you're making more than you'd make at McDonald's or Walmart. And they go, but I can't charge $500 for a wedding. Then you shouldn't be doing weddings. But I said, I'm not worth it. Yes, you are. You're willing to do something that nobody else is. And I got to the $1,500 level in weddings. But I had photographer friends that were doing $5,000 and $10,000 weddings for the same work I was doing. And I could just never ask for that. And I think if you're going to be successful, you got to go big and just say, yes, my jewelry is worth $50, not $5.
Right. Yeah, I think knowing your value.
But it's worth this. And you're amazed how people place value on an item based on the price. It's the weirdest thing. Okay. So
I think nonprofits translate to that too. I think that when you're big in your head, then all of a sudden the things that you're doing become bigger, right? Yes. It expands. So what you believe in your organization, what you believe about your potential, what you believe in your mission, it translates. And people get excited about what you're excited about. And that's how you start to build those donors and all of that stuff. And I think the other thing with nonprofits that's important is to understand grant writing. If you can't, especially in the beginning, for those in the beginning stages, I mean, we have a good example. We have a 501c3 because of our workforce development initiatives. So for our business education network and Reach Your Full Potential program, REACH program through the high school, that's all grant funded right now and private donor funded. So there's businesses that privately fund that initiative. So we have one whole employee that's funded through private business, manufacturing mostly. Actually, I think it's all manufacturing because that's how that was originally started, and then grant writing. We hired Beth Moe to do our grant writing. So we pay someone to do grant writing for us because it's a full-time job when you're doing it. And every nonprofit will be able to nod their head at that. You can do it yourself, but you have to understand how to write a story well and what, grants are not easy to always get. They aren't, you think there's like thousands of grants out there, but you get told no as many times as you get told yes, and probably more. So it's really important to know how you fit into a grant, and then be able to cater that story to that what their what their solution is, what they're giving the money for, and don't be afraid to ask. Again, there's so many nonprofits in this community and they all grant write, every single one of them. So ask someone about that or reach out to someone that does grant writing. And ask the questions. It's no different than sitting down with a business owner and hearing their story and their struggles and their successes and learning from them. The same thing holds true to a nonprofit. So, I mean, Carrie, specifically for you, there's, I don't know, 30 nonprofits in our region, probably more than that, but a lot in Winona. How many nonprofits do we have, Brian? It's gotta be like 24, 25.
Oh, it's much more than that. It's about 50 or so full-time, meaning that they're operating year round. And then it's about another 30
find
or 40
someone
events.
From a singular person to a big entity. Someone like Jeff at Big Brothers Big Sisters, to Amanda at Habitat for Humanity, or Nancy Brown that's working with all the nonprofits. I mean, there's so much that you can learn from each one of them differently. Sit down with them.
Gary, reach out for collaboration as well. That I came from an environment in Illinois where my community foundation director was not encouraging new nonprofits because boards were getting thin. Christy, you and I haven't talked about that. But when you're trying to look for treasurers and lawyers and all this to serve on a more extended board, there's just so many in a community. So if you can look and you can kind of partner with a nonprofit that's similar to what your vision is, I'd be more than welcome to bring, if your mission was similar to Big Brothers and Big Sisters, I'd be more than welcome to bring you underneath that umbrella And then you just have to worry about funding yourself, and we can take care of all the legal stuff, similar to what the community foundation was. To speak to Brian's point, if you're just got 4 friends around and you're going to be doing this play or a concert series, have at it. Have your 4 buddies around. But if you really have this big vision of involving professionals on your board, there's just not a lot of treasurers hanging around right now.
There's the other thing that is important, and I will say, because, you know, again, we have 15 people on our board. I think less is more. I would say in an organization the size of ours, I would ideally love to have 9. Another thing that's important is industry standards. So depending on what kind of nonprofit you're going to, lean into that and use that to your advantage. For the chamber, the world is working into quarterly board meetings. That's something I would love to have. But we're not.
You got quarterlies? Wow.
No, not yet. But I have a board that's supportive of it, so it'll probably happen in a year. Quarterly board meetings, and I think it's important. Like nobody wants to meet, so that's huge. But for me, when I'm selecting a board of directors, I find it really important. I'm blessed. I have heard of nightmare boards. I have never had one. So I have an amazing board of directors. And I think that there's a culture that's created, just like in a business. You create your culture and people come to it based on that culture. You have a nominating process. So for our board of directors, there's a group that is established, devised of board members, sometimes past board members, that put names up on a board and they select the board members. So the staff is out of it. It's a board process, but I do put my input forth. So things that I want to see. When I came to this board, it was a lot of men and a lot of older people. And I wanted to make sure that there was diversity, and diversity isn't just the color of your skin, but we didn't have a lot of young people. And I felt like, you know, the future isn't 65. The future is, you know, the people that are going to be the successors in business, or maybe they're already leading business. And then, you know, I wanted to have that even divide of men and women. I think our voices are important on both sides of that spectrum. So I think that's important. Have a voice in what you want the culture to continue, and your board will continue that way. So my board knows who I am and how I run my facility or my organization. And they work really, really well with me, every single one of them. I have very, very good relationships with all of them, and they're very vocal, and that's what I wanted. I want a vocal board. There are some organizations that have very passive boards, and that works for them because maybe they're more vocal themselves and they just want somebody to nod their head and say, yeah. But that also doesn't help lead your organization progressively into the future, because, you know, but Jeff's right. There are only so many people, you know, because we serve an area, we get the whole county. It's our oyster. I mean, we have a board member from Rochester actually on our board right now. So that's helpful. But the other component is, do they understand your mission? For us, they have to be a member of our organization. So that limits who we have within our board of director pool too. So I will say I'm on multiple boards and I see the same people on all my boards that I'm on. So
yeah, it is. The board conversation is a big one. So Christy and Jeff, I really appreciate that. And Jeff, for you jumping in and sharing your wisdom and expertise too. I'll note that we're right at 7:30. And so now is probably a pretty good time to bring this to a close. Christy, you couldn't have teed up the next part of the series any better, because you talked about grant writing and you specifically talked about Beth Moe, who's a grant writer in town. So this free workshop series continues for the next 6 Thursdays, believe it or not. We have a nice kind of lineup of several resources. And next Thursday at 6 p.m., we're going to have a whole workshop on grant writing. Beth Moe is going to do a presentation for the first part. And then we have a really awesome panel that is just going to sort of be there to answer questions and talk about their own experiences. And we have folks from social services, we have folks from arts, we have folks from kind of a wide diversity of grant seekers. And then the week after that is for folks who maybe don't want to do as much grant writing, but want to figure out how to make some money too. And we're going to talk about all kinds of different ways of making asks and crowdsourcing and stuff. So we appreciate everybody's time and attention and energy. Christy and Jovy, really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise and for offering yourselves as resources. We just to maybe mention that, again, engagewinona.org, we have on our homepage, we have a link to this workshop series, and that's where we're collecting all of the resources and all of the guides and all of the contact info that we're sharing tonight. And then because Carrie asked, and because I forgot to mention, we are absolutely accepting free will donations for this, with all of that money going specifically to our Lived Experience Leaders program. This is a group of diverse leaders that are doing really incredible change projects. And the more funding we bring in for them is the more funding that goes directly into their pockets to do this good work. So the link is in the chat, and donations always appreciated and welcome. This video will also be on our Facebook page and on YouTube starting tomorrow. So please share, and it'll be shared with our Lived Experience leaders. And the other thing to mention very briefly, I will put it, as folks are leaving, if you have the ability, there's a very quick kind of checkout survey form. It's both an opportunity to let us know how this went for you and if there's anything we can do better going forward, but also a great opportunity to leave your contact info. So if there's somebody here you want to connect with, somebody you want to follow up with, some question you wanted to get answered, please let us know in that chat, and we'll make sure to continue getting back to you. So thank you again, Christy. Thank you again, Jovy. Thank you again, everybody, for attending. And we hope to see many folks back here at 6 p.m. Thursday to talk and learn about grant writing next week. So have a good night. Bye, everyone.